I think for the next 50, 100 years, the most dynamic economy in the world is America.
So this century is still going to be the American century?
For economics, definitely.
Yeah. And military power?
Absolutely.
As the contentious 2024 US elections approach, let's revisit the bold predictions made by Singapore's late leader, Lee Kuan Yew, on the US's future and its position as the pre-eminent superpower, from their entrepreneurial culture to the exploding debt crisis. Let's first delve into the ups and downs in Singapore's relationship with America, and later examine Lee's thoughts on the benefits and pitfalls of America's system, especially in relation to China's rise.
You only have 2 million in your population, I understand, but if you put a small token force into the field.
I don't see it as my duty as the Prime Minister, an elected Prime Minister of Singapore, and not a client state of the United States. I'm not in receipt of your aid, nor am I here to seek aid. To go and involve his country in a situation which can end disastrously for his whole people.
Though Singapore today enjoys cordial relations with the US, Lee was initially apprehensive of American culture and leadership. Just days after Singapore's separation from Malaysia in 1965, he faced a personal crisis when his wife, Madame Kwa, required urgent surgery due to a serious medical condition. Upon being recommended an American specialist, Lee tried to reach out to him through US diplomatic channels, but was met with a series of unhelpful responses. Angry and under immense stress, Lee decided to expose to the world the time a CIA agent had attempted to bribe a Singaporean official in this now famous television interview.
We caught an American CIA agent trying to subvert our intelligence special branch officer. Bribe him so that the special branch officer will feed the CIA. I mean, subverting a Singapore officer. The man might have succeeded, but I am proud to say that the officer offered large sum of money and continuing sums of money. This was in 1960. Refused and reported the matter to his chief, who reported it to me. It was on razor's edge whether we charged him in open court or not. When I told the American government, all right, we keep quiet, you take this man away, they offered me and my party $10 million. I mean, the insult, I told them, keep it.
Lee was also unimpressed with America's approach to foreign policy during the Vietnam War, especially with the CIA-backed assassination of South Vietnam's leader in 1963, stating that the Americans lack depth. They don't understand the overseas Chinese. They don't understand the Vietnamese. That is why it is such a mess. If the Americans were in charge of Malaya and Singapore, I would have been in jail, probably tortured and dead.
But, by and large, the administration lacks depth and judgment or wisdom, which comes out of an accumulation of knowledge of human beings and human situations over a long period of time. That's lacking. And it's not their fault. What have they got? 300-400 years of history? And they've become a nation just recently.
However, Lee was appreciative of America's military presence in the region, particularly given his staunch anti-communist stance and Singapore's then heavy reliance on a weakened Britain for defense. You see, in 1967, Britain suddenly announced that it was withdrawing all its troops from Singapore, which suddenly presented huge military and economic problems for Lee.
We were no longer the commercial, administrative, or military center of the British Empire and Southeast Asia. The British were departing. The odds were against our survival, and we had to ensure our own existence, which we had previously taken for granted.
Desperate to secure Singapore's future, Lee and his team quickly ramped up the nation's defences by building up his armed forces and establishing national service battalions. But they didn't stop there. With no natural resources to export, they also launched a rapid industrialisation campaign and introduced new labour laws and tax incentives designed to attract foreign investment. Lee was particularly focused on attracting American multinational corporations, recognizing that they were the only ones equipped to provide the technology and scale necessary to quickly create a significant number of jobs. At the time, Singapore faced a daunting unemployment rate of 14%, and Lee understood that these investments were crucial for the stability and livelihoods of the nation's 2 million residents.
We had to feed 2 million people. How? Agriculture was negligible. Commerce was coming to an end. Industry was in its infancy. will get these big American multinationals to manufacture in Singapore and re-export to America and the world. And as luck would have it, the Cultural Revolution made them bypass Taiwan, Hong Kong. They came to Singapore. Texas Instruments, Hewlett-Packard, National Semiconductors, you name it, they all came. We never looked back.
The blossoming economic relationship between the US and Singapore soon expanded into the political sphere as well, with Lee cultivating friendly relations with the various administrations, all eager to get his views on key regional issues in Asia. Lee would also be invited in 1985 to address a joint session of Congress, an immense privilege and significant milestone for Singapore-US relations.
In your hands, therefore, lie the future of the world. Thank you.
However, the relationship was not all smooth sailing. In 1988, Singapore expelled an American diplomat for foreign interference in Singapore's domestic politics, which led to a diplomatic spat.
This is Singapore.
Lee would also face criticism from American politicians and the media regarding his views on press freedoms and human rights.
That they say, boy, Lee Kuan Yew has created a miracle in Singapore, but he is an authoritarian. He doesn't care about democracy. He cares little about a free press. Doesn't care.
Why should I be authoritarian when I had the people with me? That's what the people wanted. They wanted a high quality of life, low crime rate, good future for the education of the children, and jobs, better homes, better hospitals, and their families are happy and safe. No drugs, no muggings, no rapings. You can walk the streets, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're okay.
But most notably, the relationship between Singapore and the United States faced a significant test in 1993, when an American teenager, Michael Fay, was sentenced to jail and caning for vandalism.
In March, news a Singapore court had sentenced an 18-year-old American to 6 strokes with a bamboo cane swept round the world.
It's the first I've heard of it. I'll look into it.
I was bent over halfway, and he's whipping it as he's going on each step. And
you hear the whip?
And yes, I can. Mm-hmm. And on the third step, he strikes, and he cuts open your buttocks. And there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain.
Suddenly thrust into the international spotlight, Lee remarked that the American media went berserk at the prospect of an American boy being caned on his buttocks by cruel Asians in Singapore. In response to the outcry, various US senators and President Clinton called on the Singaporean government to grant Fay clemency.
New York Times, Asian Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Newsweek say we are barbaric. But that is our law. You come to Singapore, you abide by Singapore laws. So President Clinton wrote to my Prime Minister and says, please don't cane him.
However, Singapore stood firm, ultimately reducing the caning from 6 strokes to 4, while maintaining its commitment to uphold its laws.
If you don't cane the boy because he's American, what kind of a government are you? What kind of a stand do you have? Are you saying that you're afraid of the Americans? Yes, we are, but not that afraid. We have to enforce our law. And in the end, Clinton played golf with my Prime Minister, and now we have a free trade agreement with America.
Despite the Michael Fay incident, Singapore-US relations regained momentum, and in 2004, Singapore became the first Asian country to sign a bilateral free trade agreement with the United States.
The agreement between the United States and Singapore is also historic. The first between the United States and an Asia-Pacific country.
And in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Singapore demonstrated its commitment to the partnership by sending military vehicles, personnel, and aid to assist with relief efforts. Fast forward to today, the US stands as Singapore's largest investor and trade partner, with over 58 American companies operating in the country. The partnership continues to thrive across various sectors, including defense, climate change, and emerging technologies, fostering collaboration at both the governmental and people-to-people levels. However, Singapore's ethnic Chinese majority and its long-standing relationship with China have at times raised suspicion.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
As the US-China rivalry intensifies, let's now examine Lee Kuan Yew's prediction regarding the future of America in relation to its emerging rival.
What should the United States do as it looks at the inevitable growth of China as a dominant player? What would be a wise foreign policy? Because you have 2 or 3 decades before it reaches its full strength.
Oh, even in 3 decades, it won't reach its full strength. In 3 decades, its per capita is still about 1/3 of America.
Right. Its gross domestic product.
Well, for it to reach America's standard of living and standard of technology will take more than 100 years.
Lee claimed that in an increasingly globalized world, the ultimate contest would be the pursuit of talent. He argued that since the event of nuclear weapons, war between major powers would be unlikely.
Nuclear weapons between big powers, I think, is a plus because it stops major wars. Bipolar world is more secure. Both sides have weapons of mass destruction that prevents a conflict.
As such, rather than asserting a dominance through purely military means, as in the past, the ultimate competition in the modern world would be who can attract the best global talent, which is key to success in economics and technology. And Lee believed that America is best placed to do so.
It's not just American talent that gets you here. There are just 300 million people, and they got 1,300 million, and very many more able people. But you are attracting all the adventurous minds from all over the world and embracing them, and they become part of your team.
In contrast, Lee believed China would struggle to be an effective magnet for talent. He pointed out that Chinese is a much harder language to learn compared to English and will never be as popular globally. As a comparison, he states that the Confucius Institutes set up by the Chinese government worldwide have not been successful in popularizing the language. Meanwhile, American publications, television, and movies perform that function effortlessly, giving the US a significant soft power advantage.
Now, I don't see 2 million Indians and 500,000 other peoples, Japanese, Koreans, and others, becoming part of China. I mean, first, the language is so difficult.
Yes.
Secondly, the culture is not embracive. How do you fit in?
Lee's second reason for America's long-term success lies in its diverse centers of excellence scattered across the country. Major cities on both coasts, such as New York, San Francisco, and those in Texas, engage in constant competition without centralized direction from Washington. This dynamic fosters a rich diversity in society and a competitive spirit that generates innovative ideas and enduring products.
The U.S. has been the most dynamic society in innovating and starting up companies to commercialize new discoveries or inventions, thus creating new wealth. American society is always on the move and changing. They have led the world in patents, striving to produce something new or do something better, faster, cheaper, increasing productivity. Having created a product that sold well in America, they then market it worldwide.
In contrast, Lee noted that China believes prosperity stems from a strong central authority, where no individual or entity stands above the governing party.
There's been no Google formed in China. There's been no Facebook developed in China. No Microsoft developed in China. And that says something about their educational system.
Partly the educational system, but partly because there's very tight control at the top. They do not like the established order to be tinkered with. If it's working fine, leave it. And if anybody has something good, we'll borrow it and test it out. Why take the risk? If you let 1.3 billion smart guys experimenting, you'll have near chaos. And they're capable of thinking up new things. There's no need to go to Google. You can go to Baidu and do
Baidu is a Chinese search engine.
Yeah.
It's a large one, too. They own 60 or 70% of the Chinese market.
That's right.
What did you think of what the Chinese did to Google?
Well, they didn't want Google to become a vehicle for subversion.
He would also state that China's state-owned enterprises are a weakness, arguing that government-backed CEOs lack the drive of entrepreneurs who hold a majority stake in their companies.
State capitalism is not as effective as private capitalism. Would you stay awake till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning if it's not your company at stake with the latest oil crisis?
No.
So you wake up tomorrow morning knowing that your salary is intact, and the other stakeholders also make sure that you're on the ball or they remove you. You've got to stay focused. So I believe very strongly that private capitalism easily outdoes state capitalism.
And his final reason for America's long-term success is in the way entrepreneurship is encouraged and celebrated. When people succeed, they are admired as talented entrepreneurs and accorded social status and recognition they rightly deserve. This optimistic culture distinguishes it from other nations that have pre-existing social structures.
The United States is a frontier society. By and large, there were and are no class barriers. Everybody celebrated getting rich. When I saw America's amazing recovery in the last 10 years of the last century, after it lost much ground to industries in Japan and Germany, I appreciated the full meaning of the Americans being entrepreneurial. But for every successful entrepreneur in America, many have tried and failed. Quite a few tried repeatedly until they succeeded. Quite a few succeeded and continued to create and start up new companies as serial entrepreneurs. This was the way America's great companies were built. This is the spirit that generates a dynamic economy.
Though Lee was assured of America's continuing economic might, he would also suggest that there is also a dark side to their successful entrepreneurial and competitive system. For one is the stark inequality in American society, stating an underclass has developed. Amid the opulence, the razzle-dazzle, the beautiful shops in New York, you can easily find homeless Americans lying on the pavements, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and cardboards for sleeping mats.
The wealthy and the powerful owe a duty to the downtrodden.
Do you believe that?
Yes, I do.
Because of a Confucian philosophy, or?
Yeah. So you don't find beggars, you don't find half-starving people sleeping in doorways or under the bridges or whatever. It offends the whole society. So we pay a little bit more, rehabilitate them, put them in proper homes, feed them, teach them a job. We just can't leave them as derelicts in society. It's offensive.
Offensive to
the rest of society.
And the judgment of history and the judgment of...
No, our judgment of ourselves as a self-respecting people. Yes.
However, he was more concerned by America's individualistic society and its influence on the world. In his renowned 1994 interview, Culture is Destiny, he highlighted the erosion of moral foundations and a decline in personal responsibility in the West. He argued that the individual's right to behave as they please has become dogma, and this comes at the expense of societal order, with drug abuse, violent crime, and shootings becoming increasingly commonplace.
But do I want to be with America, like America, with its inability to control the drug problem? No. Or the gun problem? No.
He would contrast the approach of East Asian societies, where the main objective is to have a well-ordered society so that everyone can have maximum enjoyment of their freedoms.
I go by what is good governance. What are the things I aim to do? Healthy society that gives everybody a chance to achieve its maximum.
More importantly, Lee recognized the dangers of increasing individualism in society, believing it has eroded the family unit, the essential building blocks of society, leading individuals to become more reliant on government for jobs, healthcare, and other needs. In contrast, he noted that one of the reasons that Chinese people have endured for 5,000 years as a culture is their reliance on traditional family structures.
There's a profound difference in the core philosophy between the American and the Chinese. And it's a reflection of your history. You came over in the Mayflower, you were seeking religious freedom. You have been immensely fortunate and successful. 2 world wars left Europe in a shambles, and you emerged as the undamaged technological and industrial power. China has a completely different and a checkered history, 4,000 to 5,000 years of ups and downs, long periods when there was no government, anarchy, warlords. Why have they survived in spite of anarchy, disaster, floods, famines? Because there was a social network independent of government that sustained them. The immediate family, the extended family, the clan. You owed them an obligation. You cannot turn them away. And that's how they survived. I think we are safer if we keep those family bonds, those traditional life raft systems not dependent on the state, which places the emphasis on family, extended family, and then the government, and not the individual at the expense of the family and the state, which is the American system. Yes, we also now want to try and get our little Bill Gates going. But in the context of keeping our society solid so that we will survive as a people.
He would also suggest that there are no guarantees that exceptional talent from other countries, like in China or Singapore, will continue to find America an attractive place to move or to stay in.
Asians in Western countries must swallow their pride from time to time, particularly in periods of economic slowdown or recession, when racial discrimination becomes more blatant and racist abuse and attacks more prevalent. Whilst experiencing higher unemployment in such times, blame the Asians for taking away jobs. Some Asians complain that in many companies and organizations there is an invisible ceiling for Asian employees. In other words, beyond a certain point you cannot be promoted. However competent the Asians are, they seldom rise above a certain level. Furthermore, they tend to be shunted to technical and operational jobs rather than given key managerial appointments.
Beyond social issues, his biggest upcoming concern for America is his looming debt crisis, much of it funded by printing US dollars.
You and I talked about America's deficit and debt problems, and its seeming political dysfunction to do anything about it.
I still am. I still am worried. The leaders think they can tweak the problem without pain, and they're afraid to tell the people, look, we've got to do this, we've got to make these cuts. And over the period of X number of years, 5, 6, 7, our deficits will go. The baby boomers will have to recognize that the world they expected is not the world they're living in.
So they have to do what?
They have to forego the kind of benefits.
The kind of benefits, as well as the rate of consumption.
Yeah.
You believe that if we do not do something about it, we become an
indebted country.
We're already an indebted country.
Become more indebted, and eventually you have inflation. You are indebted in a different way from other countries. Other countries borrow US dollars or pounds or euro, and they got to pay back. You owe yourself US dollars. So you're under no pressure to pay back, but you're under pressure from such a huge amount of currency floating around that you get inflation.
Lee warned that if America fails to address its debt problem and instead kicks the can down the road, it could face excessive inflation and a potential run on the dollar as investors withdraw their funds. Such a scenario would be disastrous for a nation striving to maintain its military and naval presence in the Pacific to counter China's influence.
But the 21st century will be a contest for supremacy in the Pacific, because that's where the growth will be. That's where the bulk of the economic strength of the globe will come from. Now, if you do not hold your ground in the Pacific, you cannot be a world leader. To hold that ground in the Pacific, you must not let your fiscal deficits and your dollar come to grief. The financial community, the bankers and all the hedge funds and everybody come to a conclusion that you're not going to tackle these deficits, and they begin to move their assets out. That's real trouble.
Looking further, Lee expressed concern that even if America manages to overcome its debt crisis, more pressing issues would remain, particularly regarding its poorly funded education system, which he criticized for producing nearly illiterate students.
Me fail English? That's impossible.
Another problem that Lee believed plagued the US was the need for a nationwide infrastructure upgrade, a growing class divide, persistent discrimination according to race, an electoral process that is so vicious and short-sighted that it puts off talented candidates who would rather pursue lucrative careers in banking or finance than to serve the nation.
The problem with the American politics and Washingtonian attention span is that it is focused on the immediate and the results of the either midterm or full-term elections.
Lastly, Lee expressed grave concern regarding America's response to China's growing influence.
They asked me, is China a friend or a foe? I said, neither at the moment. And it's really up to you and how you deal with them. It will decide whether they are friends or foes.
He warned that any increase in US protectionism would likely provoke retaliatory measures from China, leading to a downward spiral in the global trade system and ultimately an overall poorer world.
Let us then not forget, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, that protectionism and less trade means less growth. The answer to job losses is more, not less trade. America can upgrade her declining low value added industries, or they will continue to decline whether America goes protectionist or not.
Drawing a chilling parallel to the 1930s, Lee noted that protectionist policies following the Great Depression contributed to the outbreak of World War II. He feared that a similar cycle of trade wars and economic nationalism could again pave the way for military conflict between major powers.
A replay of the Depression of the 1930s, which led to World War II, would be ruinous for all. All major powers in the West share this responsibility for not repeating this mistake.
You see, Lee was a vocal critic of US foreign policy, from their failures in Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, stating that their evangelizing spirit in changing the world puts it at a disadvantage compared to China's foreign policy.
First, I don't think the Chinese go around the world evangelizing or proselytizing and say, you follow my system. They are unlike the Americans. They don't want to export their system, but I'm not here to change you or to make you like me, which I think is a great advantage because then many third world countries feel comfortable with them.
Lee instead urged the United States to recognize China's status as a great power and to seek collaborative solutions to global challenges, rather than attempting to isolate or humiliate it. He emphasized that China is primarily acting in its own national interests and is not focused on reshaping the world order.
So what should the United States do while it has the position it has now?
I think make sure that they feel that they are accepted at the top table. You take China, she's second largest economy, but she hasn't got the false projections nor the interest to a worldwide interest. She only concentrates on those areas where she needs oil or other resources.
Moreover, Lee argued that if the US truly wanted to influence China positively, it should encourage further free trade and investment, fostering greater integration and interdependence between China, US, and the global economy. This approach, he believed, would ultimately benefit both nations and promote stability in the international arena.
What do you want from the next president?
Engagement with the world, keep trade going, don't backtrack, or you'll put yourself at a disadvantage and put the world at a disadvantage, and you make conflicts more likely. In trade and technology, and through the internet, and through your investments there, you can create a multiple set of bonds, of links, that will not only closely tie up the two economies so that they are dependent on each other, but also people, their CEOs with your CEOs, their engineers with your engineers, their accountants with yours, lawyers, and so on, so that there is a broadband appreciation of each other.
Lee also advised against US involvement in military conflict over Taiwan, asserting that reunification is an immovable objective of the Chinese government.
But I don't see Taiwan being able to resist the pull of the mainland with or without American help. There will come a time when the Seventh Fleet cannot intervene because of Chinese aircraft carriers, and China has always considered Taiwan a part of China. The fact that Taiwan was independent from 1989 till the present doesn't make any difference in the long history of China.
The view from the Chinese side was, we can wait, but eventually we'll be reunited.
Oh yes, of course. It is a fixed and immovable objective.
Nevertheless, he believed that the US presence in the region would persist, even as China's military capabilities grow. He pointed out that countries like Vietnam, which have competing interests in the strategically important and resource-rich South China Sea, would likely seek to retain an American presence. He argued that US engagement provides smaller nations in Asia with greater choice and breathing room in relation with their much larger neighbor.
I think the US can be a benign stabilizer of the world order.
You take Vietnam, do they want the Chinese to be dominant in the South China Sea? No. You take the Philippines, also no. But I don't think it's likely that the Japanese or South Koreans, Southeast Asians would want to have China as a dominant force, and they will always want to have the Americans inside the area to balance the Chinese. That gives us more space.
But in the end, he concluded that the United States must accept the reality of a more powerful China, emphasizing that it is not merely another significant player on the global stage, but rather the biggest player in the history of the world.
The 20th century was the American century. The first half of the 21st century, a large part of it will still be the American. But I believe the second half, you will have to share top places with China and also with India, make space for them too.
While Lee was often critical of many aspects of America, he admired their level of optimism in society, wanting to adopt many aspects of their entrepreneurial zeal in Singapore society.
Some of our energetic and resourceful and able people must go into business and not stay in salaried jobs. This is a change of culture, of values, of mindset. It will not be easy, but some can succeed.
In his final published book, Lee reflected on America's resilience, stating that those who believe in its immediate decline are mistaken. It has faced great trials and challenges within living memory. The Great Depression, the Vietnam War, the rapid post-war rise of industrial powerhouses Japan and Germany. Each time it found the will and energy to recover its position at the front of the pack. America has prevailed. It will do so again. And the fact that the Americans are having an internal debate about whether or not they are declining is a healthy sign. It means they have not become complacent. But he asked this of America. China has lasted 5,000 years. Can you?
They're enormously curious.
They are.
Enormously curious.
Not just curious. They're enormously ambitious to catch up. That Beijing Olympics, if you watch it, what was the message?
We're back.
No, 5,000 years. And don't forget, we invented all these things. And we're going to go ahead in the next 5,000 years. It's the only country where a language has survived 5,000 years. The only country where the present generation shares the same basic thinking as the past. And they're very proud of it.
And the United States has to encourage them?
No, you don't have to encourage them. You just got to understand that they don't want to be an honorary member of the West, unlike Russia. They're quite happy to be Chinese and to remain as such. So when you tell them you ought to do this, you ought to do that, they say, yes, thank you. And at the back of their minds, we have lasted 5,000 years, have you?